be dismissed. The holy founder of Islam, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had built an image in the society of being a man of absolute justice. Even when there were feuds between Muslims and Jews, or Muslims and idolaters, they would seek his judgment. In one case, it is reported that a piece of land was disputed between a Muslim and a Jew. They approached the Holy Prophet and asked him to decide the matter. The Holy Prophet first asked the Muslim claimant to provide proof. The Muslim said that he had no witnesses, but was telling the truth on his word of honor. The Holy Prophet ignored him and asked the respondent to swear in the name of God if the land belonged to him. The Muslim protested and said, "O Prophet of God, he will swear falsely. It is trivial for him to be untruthful for a piece of land." The Holy Prophet replied, "There is no other way to decide this matter. If he swears, then the land would be his." And that is exactly what happened. Once a small trade party visited Khaybar, an area occupied by a Jewish clan by the name of Bani Nazir. These people were earlier expelled from Medina and were rehabilitated there, but that is a different story. This place had become a Jewish stronghold from then on. When the trade party from among the Muslims visited Khaybar, one of them was murdered. They returned to the Holy Prophet and asked that the responsibility for the murder should be placed on Jews of that area, and blood money imposed on them as a group. The Holy Prophet said, "Do you have any proof of this man being murdered by a Jew?" They replied, "There is no witness, but it has to be one of them. Nobody else lives there." The Holy Prophet said, "The only available course is that the Jews must swear their innocence." The Jews did that and were acquitted of the murder. However, by the order of the Holy Prophet, the aggrieved were paid blood money from the state treasury. We see in him kindness wedded to his sense of justice in the most beautiful and well-poised way, which is indeed a pleasure to watch. The Holy Prophet was also very kind to his servants and slaves. The question of slavery is a much misunderstood concept in the West. I will not touch upon this in any detail, but I assure you that there is only one permissible way mentioned in the Holy Quran by which slaves can be enslaved. This is in chapter Al-Anfal, verse 68. It reads that the only way of making human beings slaves is after a very severe battle, not just a skirmish. In those days, there was no system of prisoner of war camps, so the prisoners would be distributed to different homes. We also see that the Holy Quran goes on to suggest numerous routes for liberation of the slaves. There are so many verses on this subject that after going through these, it is surprising how slavery could ever be conceived by the present-day Muslims as validated perpetually. According to the Holy Quran, if a slave is not liberated by ransom paid by his relatives, and has no other means of getting liberated, he can demand his liberation from a Muslim court. All he has to do is to appeal to the court, asking immediate release, on the condition that he will earn and pay back on small, easy installments whatever cost is considered to be his value. These injunctions were very strictly imposed in the days of the Holy Prophet. Sometimes thousands of slaves were liberated in a single day. Owing to the legacy of the past, and also because those were troubled times, some slaves were inherited by people and went on serving private homes. The Holy Prophet repeatedly admonished Muslims that they should be as kind to them as to their kith and kin. We find mention of many such incidents. For instance, when a master and a slave went together for buying something, the shopkeepers could not distinguish between them as to who was the master and who was the slave. Once Ali, who later became the fourth caliph of Islam after the Holy Prophet, went shopping and asked for two identical pieces of clothing. The shopkeeper suggested that he should buy clothes of different color. He said, "My master, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, told me to treat my slaves as I would my own kith and kin. So whatever I wear, I shall make my slave wear the same." Abu Masud Badri relates, "I was striking a slave with a whip when I heard a voice behind me. 'Beware, Abu Masud.' I was so upset that I did not recognize the voice until the person drew near, and I discovered that it was the Holy Prophet, and he was saying, 'Beware, Abu Masud. Allah has more power over you than you have over this slave.' And I responded, 'Messenger of Allah, I will set him free to win the pleasure of Allah.'" The Holy Prophet observed, If you had not done that, then you would have been singed by the fire. Zad is often quoted in the history of Islam because he is the only slave to have lived with the holy founder of Islam. He reports, "During my service to the Holy Prophet, I made many mistakes, but he never said, 'Woe to me,' even once. He never criticized me. There was no question of beating me, of course." Zad was bought as a slave by Muhammad before his prophethood during the pre-Islamic period. Zad's father and uncle who lived in Persia came to learn that Zad could be found in Mecca serving as a slave to Hazrat Muhammad, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. They approached him in Mecca and begged him to liberate Zad. He said, "Of course I will do that, but why not ask him? He is a free man. If he wants to stay, I cannot compel him to leave." So he kept quiet while Zad was made to appear before his father and uncle. There was an emotional meeting as they had met after a long time. They asked Zad to return to his home. He replied, "If the choice is mine, I will not return because I have discovered a man who is dearer to me than my father, my mother, my uncle, and everyone else in the world." Hearing this, the holy founder of Islam took them out and in the presence of some people proclaimed, "I declare that Zad is no longer a slave. From now on he will be my adopted son." Chapter 5. The Prophet as a Family Man. Now I will turn to another aspect of the Holy Prophet Muhammad as a father, as a husband, and as a man in relation to his other relatives. Hazrat Aisha reports that whenever the Holy Prophet's daughter Fatima visited him, he always stood up, showing respect for her, kissed her hand, and had her seated where he himself had been seated. He always treated with kindness and respect the relatives of his late wife Khadija, extending the same to her friends. Likewise, he treated the relatives of his wet nurse Halima. Once a close relative of hers visited the Prophet. He stood up and spread a sheet for her to sit upon. When inquired about her, she was introduced by him as a close relative to his wet nurse, whom he respected like he would respect his own mother. In relation to his wives, although there are reports of Aisha and his other wives losing their temper with him, never once is he reported to have retorted in the same way. He is never known to have addressed them harshly. Aisha narrates that he helped her in the daily household chores, all this over and above his duties to the whole of mankind as a prophet of God. He mended his own clothes and shoes, went himself to fetch water for his use, and would never seek help in these matters. This aspect of his character impressed his companions immensely. Aisha describes his bedding as a sack of hide filled with leaves. She says, "We never ate bread made of wheat for 3 consecutive days. There were times when months would pass and we did not eat meat or bread, instead filled our bellies with dates and some milk, except for an odd present when someone would slaughter a sheep and send us a piece of meat." Umar narrates, "I went into a small room which was occupied by the holy founder of Islam. He was lying on a straw bedding so rough in nature that on the side he was leaning I saw straw marks all over his body. I scanned the room and it was empty. There was nothing except for a small bucket of water and 1 or 2 odd things. I knew him to be the most beloved of God, a person who had reached the summit of humanity. This contrast so overwhelmed me with sorrow that I started to cry. The Holy Prophet turned